And welcome to this very special report here for the War Correspondent show. Today, we're analyzing the financial warfare and the white hat psychological operations. With me today, of course, is returning guest Kerry Cassidy. She's the author of The Rebel Gene. You can find her book here on Amazon, and you can find her work at projectcamelotportal.com. Kerry, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you.
Excited to have you on. And of course, folks, please join me in welcoming the Golden Jackass himself. You can find his work at golden-jackass.com. He is, of course, Dr. Jim Willie, the hat trick letter editor-in-chief. Mr. Willie, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm stressed out and very strange, but thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today on this live interactive show. I see you guys in the live chat now. I wanted to bring your attention, folks, to the beyondmystic.net/war page right now. At the top of the screen there, of course, there's a coupon code to enter to win our silver 1 kilo silver bar offered to you by Miles Franklin. But below that are the topic notes for today's episode, as well as all the reference material we're going to be talking about here today during the show. And hopefully that will help you tie in all of this amazing information we're going to share with you guys today on this particular episode. So big thank you for joining us there. I'll bring your comments up on the screen as it pertains to the show during the next hour or so here. And if we do have time, maybe we'll have some viewer questions at the end of the show. So thank you so much, everyone. Let's start here. Let me start with you, Kerry. In the last interview you did with SGNon, people can find that on the War Correspondent page right now. You suggested that there's a lot of things happening right now, and we seem to be coming to this push come to shove moment. I wanted to ask you both here to take a few minutes to share with the audience members your 40,000-foot view of the 5G war we find ourselves in right now, and what perhaps are the key vectors you guys are following right now, or what's important on your particular radar. Let's start with you, Kerry.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on the show, and it's a privilege to be with Jim Willie. I've been following his work for many years, and I really admire his grasp of the financial situation is just amazing, and learned a lot from him. So, and Jean-Claude, nice to be reconnected with you. So what I would say is that we're at war. That's very obvious, but it's a war on many levels. So we are at a spiritual war, and we are part of a political situation that involves war and many wars, small wars, proxy wars, and so on. And recently, 107 is just informed a group of people very clearly that any day we could have a nuclear exchange with Russia, and it also sounds like China would come in there as well. So I think that is a threat. It's a looming threat. I'm not sure how logical it even is. I don't know that there really would be such an exchange between the big superpowers, as we have called them. So my understanding initially was that there would be a nuclear event or some such event that was larger than normal in Ukraine, and that would be something that is obviously provoked by NATO, and possibly even a false flag on that level, and that Ukraine or that Putin would actually, after provocation, do something rather drastic. But the way it was reframed recently by 107, who is one of the White Hats, and I follow the White Hats quite closely. I analyze their work. I have various opinions of their tactics and operations, but I am fully and totally behind their work, because I feel that they are standing up for humanity at this time. We are under attack. Obviously, population elimination, that's a big agenda of the dark side Illuminati. And they have had their plans in place for many, many years. So what they've been rolling out, we were told in Project Camelot, and I've been now doing this for over 18 years. In the beginning, the very beginning, we were told that all these things would come to the fore, and that they would be all at the same time. So the financial collapse and reset and, various wars. There are some Earth changes on the horizon I'd like to talk about. I won't get into it right this second, but I can definitely get into that. And I think we need to touch on that because I've gotten news on that front that may or may not happen. It's always like that, right? But we're looking at something very serious in the offing and some very interesting stuff that's come forward today. Even Alex Jones is touching on the billionaires building underground bases and refuge on the island of Kauai. And I don't know, it's probably not a coincidence that I ended up going there after having sort of a ticket there for 3 years that I couldn't use. And finally was able to go there with a friend of mine, because I didn't want to travel alone. And so that was made possible. It's a gorgeous place. It's really like Jurassic Park, and the real Jurassic Park, I guess.
Right.
And so that's really fascinating to me. Zuckerberg is building a massive compound over there, apparently. So that substantiates the possibility of some Earth changes in the near future. But we can dive into that. I also want to say that, the whole COVID rollout was part of a transhuman agenda, and that's been rolled out and planned for many, many years. It's important to know that there are levels above what we talk about in terms of the globalists / Illuminati / cabal, etc. So I'm not sure. I don't want to go on too long here. I'm trying to touch on bits and pieces that I can roll in later. But the and the nano AI juncture, that conjunction, that is something that is not only in our future, but here now and affecting everything that we're doing and everything we're seeing. And a lot of people are not understanding that, I feel. So I don't know. I think, yes, the global reset is happening, but it has a competitor, which is the White Hat's QFS. Whether or not they will both come to the fore, at the same exact time, or whether the White Hats are going to let the the global reset roll out, and then they're going to put their foot in the game. I don't know. So that's an interesting conjecture as well. So I think that should cover it.
There's a lot there. And folks, yes, there's a big show here today. Thank you so much, Kerry, for that. And folks, if you follow along on the page here, I just brought the link down. We're going to get into humanity at a crosshair here. We're going to talk about following the money here. Kerry just mentioned that a little bit here. We're going to talk about subversion, what the White Hats are doing, and what the ultimate justice might be here in this end game scenario. Of course, we're going to look at the Ukraine war, perhaps also the Earth changes, and what perhaps Dr. Richard Allen Miller is reporting also. So I took note of that. Kerry, we'll get back to that in a little bit of a moment here. And we're also going to talk about what comes next here. So these are the main topics, but there's a lot in there. And you just mentioned 107. So I wanted to bring this to the audience members' attention also on June 16. So this is going to be the next special report here. One has just confirmed yesterday. This is going to be June 16 at 1 p.m. Eastern. And here we're going to talk about DEFCON, so defense readiness here in the United States, as well as continuity of government and how that ties in here to how all of this is rolling out. So please stay tuned for that as well. Now, Jim, in one of our last episodes last year, we talked about the fall of Kazakhstan, the Illuminati capital of the world, and how they had their fallback position in the Ukraine. That's led to this war in Ukraine now. It's led to the chasing of the biolabs, chasing of the money, the trafficking over there. And it also became an operation choke point for all of this trafficking and the money laundering. And that's caused a bit of a headache here for the Khazarian mafia. Now, for the people who haven't watched our last couple of shows here on Beyond Mystic, can you give them also here a 40,000-foot view here of how you see the financial system here in tandem with this global war on humanity? Give us the vectors that you're following right now and what's on your radar, and also what's on the latest report here at the Hat-Trick Letter on golden-jackass.com. Jim.
Okay, the 40,000-foot view. I tell you, this is tough. And nice job, Kerry. Not an easy question. Not an easy question at all. Like, okay, could you give a quick 3-minute summary on 15 topics? Not very easy to do. Okay, first of all, Biden is not the president. He's the resident. Trump is the president, and he has the launch codes. He has the nuclear suitcase. They call it the football. I have kind of a weird theory. I'm going to touch on all these things, but it's not going to be really easy. If there was going to be something nuclear, it would have happened already. If there was going to be a nuclear false flag in Poland, it would have happened a year ago. We had preview to the false flag, therefore it won't happen. There's no nuclear football. There's no nuclear codes that the NATO clowns have. Those generals are basically narco generals with uniforms. They have American uniforms. Okay, the 40,000-foot view. We are in the middle of a takeover of our country. They're trying to convert it into a new world order. I don't even know what to call it. Not a country. It's like an arena, a prison. This is a once-in-a-century event. I don't know exactly when the British pound lost its long shadow of dominance across the world, but I think it was sometime around 1910, 1920, 1915, somewhere around then. And it's interesting that the British allowed the American dollar, the US dollar, to become the dominant because they allowed it. The United States is a vassal nation to the crown. And people who don't get that, they're missing a really big piece. For instance, last week I had a client in Wisconsin chase down the title to his big property in Wisconsin, and on the deed it said United Kingdom. Okay, there's a lot going on. We are at war. I started raising a lot of flags and making noise in the 90s with Clinton. After Sandia Labs, I said, this looks like a narco takeover. This looks like collusion with China. So we had the narco presidents of Papa Bush, who, by the way, served a 12-year term. He was really in control during the Reagan 8 years. Let's get real. If not 12 years, then 11. He's the longest serving president that we've had since Franklin Roosevelt, not Federal Roosevelt. Okay, so the narco presidents of Papa Bush, Bill Clinton, Baby Bush, and Barack Obama gave us over 30 years of installing the NWO, New World Order. That is not going to be removed in one term for Trump, nor another term for whatever. This is going to be a 10-year period, a 6-year period, an 8-year period. We're at war. We are seeing the phase out now of the king dollar. Notice a gigantic event that has not been properly reported in the U.S. press. The Saudis are selling oil in Chinese yuan. The UAE is selling oil and LNG in Chinese yuan. There's now a deal with Russia, China, Iran, and Iraq to do mutual sales in Chinese yuan. We have now entered a new era. It's called the petro yuan. Now, for those people who think, well, let them do whatever they want. You know, I get a lot of really dumb fuck comments. Let them do whatever they want. Okay, well, what they will want next is not to trade in dollars for anything. And they won't be buying treasury bonds. They won't be financing our gargantuan federal debt. And we will be monetizing it alone, like Zimbabwe and Chile did. We're at the end of the petrodollar era. We're at the end of the king dollar era, and we're about to embark on something very significant where it's going to be the dollar for almost a half. Let's just call it 40%. The yuan for 40%. The ruble in their domain, former Soviet republics and maybe some of the Soviet blocs, like Romania, Bulgaria, Moldavia, eventually Poland, they'll be trading in ruble. And there's going to be another one. I think it'll be the XRP, because if they can't agree on something, they're going to compromise with the XRP. That's how it's going to get more and more volume. Okay, so for those idiots out there who don't think the petrodollar is important, you're going to find out a very rude awakening that nobody is buying our treasury bonds anymore. They're not just selling them, they're not buying them. And we're going to have a problem in our home front with something very unusual that the morons also don't comprehend, and that is the primary bond dealers. They're about 12, 15, I think they're fewer now. Let's just call them 12 banks, and they're under contract to buy whatever treasury bonds are not sold in an auction. So we're going to see some primary bond dealer banks go into failure for having to buy the treasuries under contract and having no buyers. We're at war with the borders. Now that has raised a lot of attention, but a lot of people don't understand. And I got to be honest, Jean-Claude and Kerry, a year ago I thought, this is a nuisance. And this is, for instance, there are 10,000 Somalis living in Lewiston, Maine. Let that sink in. Lewiston, Maine, they're all over the country. I don't think those Somalis in Maine are going to be recruited for armed service and insurrection. But we now have, since Obama began the open borders, and open borders, it's all part of the United Nations plan. No borders, no rights, no good food, and no safe children. Now I'm starting to believe that we've got 30 to 50 million people who don't have a passport, who are on welfare, who get benefits, who are told to vote Democrat or you lose your benefits. And half of them or more might be young men who could pick up arms. So they might be building sleeper cells. I got a client in the South, and he's a very smart guy. He's a commercial pilot. He said, Jim, part of the reason, and this is part of the war, I'm answering the war question. Part of the reason we have a shortage of pilots is not just that they're vaccinated and harmed. The government, the shadow government, has hired a lot of pilots to move all across the country the 30 million unvetted immigrants. They're all over the place. I had a client consult a month ago, and the guy said to me, Jim, they're in Reno, Nevada on any Saturday. You can see like 20 on a street corner. They're not going to work. They're just hanging out. He said they're menacing looking. Okay, the war. This is an everything war following the everything bond bubble. This is a full station New World Order implementation. And what I find hilarious in a tragic Greek comedy way is that some smart people that I know don't see the attack. They don't see the infiltration of Nazis from Operation Paperclip. They don't see the second generation Nazis with, who was it? Strauss. Help me out here. Rosenstein, Strzok with a Z in there, and Papa Bush, whose real name is Scherf. He's gone, but
Oh, I think we might have lost Jim there. You seem to be frozen. Jim, are you back?
Okay, I'm here. I'm here. I didn't see any problem on my end. Okay, what I find hilarious is a lot of smart people do not detect the infiltration of the Nazis 50 years ago, nor do they see the third generation for Strzok and Rosenstein and Bush and Mueller. Okay, these are all Nazi heritage.
Werner von Braun, yes.
Werner von Braun, yeah, he was made a hero But okay, I know somebody who said, Jim, I've got access to some of the paperclip data. It's 10,000 people. It's not 200. It's not 82. Okay. Again,
Jim,
I find hilarious. People don't see it, Jean-Claude. They don't see it. And let's not leave out the continuity of government. We got to touch on that.
Okay, well, we'll be back to that in the third segment, Jim. Speaking about people not seeing it, this is what we're starting to feel out here. And I had this interview a couple of months ago with Ricardo Bossi. This was on the second installment here of the War Correspondent Show, and he was just talking about what you just said now, that this below ground war that perhaps started with the assassination of JFK is now moving into the overt stages. And this is why we're seeing the train derailments, the food processing plants on fire, and everything else we're seeing here on mainstream news that doesn't seem to make sense unless you understand here perhaps the bigger picture that both you and Kerry have put together here. Now, Kerry, let's move into the first segment of the show here. When you were last on the show, we did this a book review of your book here, The Rebel Gene. I wanted to bring up on page 63.
Great title, by the way.
Yes. On page 63, the Anunnaki were responsible for putting in place a frequency fence around most, if not all, of this seeding of humanity. By frequency fence, I mean an implementation to activation of our DNA beyond a certain point, an impediment to the activation of our DNA to a certain point. Now, in the context of the last 2-3 years with COVID, it seems to suggest that perhaps it has something to do with the Inanna's return. Perhaps it has something to do with the sun or our cycles around the sun and the yugas of time. But it appears that humanity, for all their intention here, are jumping that fence. And it appears that COVID was perhaps an attempt to put us back underneath that fence. Can you speak about that and how that ties into this war we find ourselves in, and why they put so much effort into these mRNA shots? It wasn't just a depopulation agenda, but it appears to be also a manipulation of those genes, of those rebel genes here, to make us more docile and perhaps also to train us for perhaps a future space program initiative. Tie that in to the audience members who perhaps haven't read it and who haven't seen that last book, Decode, we did, Kerry.
Okay, well, it's important to say from the outset that the Anunnaki were not the only race of beings that came to Earth to interfere with the development of humanity and this seeding, as we call it, of humanity. So apparently, if I understand it correctly, and this information does come from Oceana Dean's Voyager books, and I also interviewed her and traveled in India with her and her group as well. So I became very familiar with that work that she has put out, which is not from her personally. She's actually, getting downloads and then relating them in the books. And they come from what are called the guardian races, who claim to be our sort of overseers, or the ones that are trying to safeguard this seeding of humanity. And there are many races, that are positive races, what we would call, in theory, positive races. Although I have to say that at the last juncture, and this gets into the so-called Adam and Eve story, that is more of a story for children than for adults, because it's really about the taking over of our genome and changing it during a certain period of time in our trajectory. And this is where the reptilian DNA was included in our genome, so that we would defend ourselves and actually also be more aggressive, because the other seedings of humanity were being preyed upon by the reptilians and eaten and used as sex slaves and so on and so forth, which they are continuing to do now. However, we are much more resistant to that. We have fought our way through history, if you want to look at it like that, and we have survived thus far. So that's an important caveat to the number of races that have been involved in creating our genome. And we are originally from Lyra, which is where the humanoid races come from initially, at least in this, set of galaxies or whatever, but it's possible they go back further than that as well. And by the way, we are related to the Pleiadians. The Anunnaki themselves were Pleiadian initially. They were taken over by the Dracos and the reptilians at a certain point in their juncture. That's why a lot of people can't figure out whether they look reptilian or whether they look humanoid. And they actually are a combination of both. And some look more reptilian than others. So it's important to sort of get that background. I would say that this initial, when the Anunnaki came and basically kind of took over the earth, and, Anu, the king, had his two sons, Enki and Enlil, it goes the story, right? And Zecharia Sitchin has written, 12 books or more on this subject. Some feel, and he was translating from the what are Sumerian tablets. However, some people feel his interpretation was wrong. There's a lot of disagreement about that. I know that for one thing, for those that are interested, that Robert Dean, Bob Dean, someone I interviewed a number of times over many years and was a good friend of mine who has passed on. He was part of the Old Boys Network. He was a staunch supporter, just for what it's worth, of the work of Zecharia Sitchin. I only met Sitchin once, right before he died. I wanted to interview him, of course, but was unable to do so. I don't know whether that would ever have happened. But I can tell you that towards the end of his life, he felt that he was basically downloading Enki. Okay, and he wrote that book, which I forget the exact title, but has Enki in the title. And that was, I think, one of the last books he wrote. So the reason I'm going into that, and Rebel Gene, by the way, is actually was sort of a takeoff on that whole concept. The idea being that Enki supposedly as a geneticist, and he got very involved with humans to the point of giving his DNA to female humans, how that happened, because there's a size difference. These individuals at the time, Anunnaki, were 9 foot or more tall. The humans were not that tall. And so whether he actually had sex with the women, we don't know, but it's written in the Bible, as you know, that sort of thing. So the idea here was that Enki was more interested in humanity to develop, and he centered his work with Inanna down in Africa, whereas Enlil was more about limiting human freedom, and he was based in the Middle East. So when there was this thing which was talked about back in those days, I guess, and it's basically the rebel gene, the gene to rebel. And so I talk about that being in some of us, and some of us are born administrators, sad to say, but our genes are actually can be awakened. So that doesn't mean you're condemned for life to be a follower and a kiss ass and, as it goes. But that is a moving target. So we are having our DNA awakened now. There is reason to believe that there is incoming waves of energies coming from even the merging with the Sagittarius galaxy, etc. And we are moving, we are actually rising. And this is why the Illuminati, as I call them, you can call them Khazarian Mafia if you like, but there is much beyond the Khazarians that is involved, because there are Chinese Illuminati and all kinds of various races, and we are all really a melting pot of races at this time, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so what happens is they did put a frequency fence. That was one of the things they did to try to limit the number of years we lived. So we were living way over 100. It was more like, even Ashanuddin, I think, says that we were living at that time maybe even 1,000 years. That our bodies can renew themselves, and we can heal ourselves as well. That we have all kinds of what might be termed superpowers that have not been fully awakened. There's a well-known movie called Lucy that depicts in a very graphic way how humanity could jumpstart their own trajectory. And that is happening actually as we speak. And I think a lot of people will even testify to their own development in that way. And certainly with the new children coming in. So you can see how this, it's like watching a great movie where the competition and the antagonist is very, very strong, but at the same time, we are rising in power right in their face. So this is the drama that we're all a part of at this time. So hopefully that kind of goes down that road.
Yes, and let me just ask you a supplemental question, and then I'll get Jim to chime in here also how COVID ties all that here in this financial coup d'etat. But Kerry, as we look at the yugas on the screen right now, this procession that we have around the galactic central sun suggests that as we're moving closer to it, our bodies become lighter, we become stronger, we have more knowledge. Of course, we're going into the age of Aquarius now, the knowledge bearer. But as we come back down, we do the contrary. We go to sleep, we have less resources, we have less energy, we have less insights on the world around us. And as we're moving into this new phase now, going back towards galactic central sun, is it possible that, as you talked about these energies in space, that these yugas that we can see in our old traditions are perhaps what the Illuminati or the Khazarian Mafia were trying to hack here with also the COVID mRNA, perhaps to stop or limit or put an additional fencing here on this process, this natural process of humanity here and our consciousness waking up? Do you think that that's partly tied into that, or do you see COVID more as an operation, a tool to continue managing the farm here on the planet, and perhaps also to cull the herd, so to speak? How do you tie those two together, Kerry?
Well, first of all, I would caution anyone to take at face value this diagram of the Kali Yugas and how our future is supposed to go, because just offhand, and I'm just looking at that briefly, I don't study that chart, but I can say that there is a confusion about history that is, I think, promoted by the dark side as usual. Mm-hmm. And their idea is that we go in a circle, that we repeat things over and over again. But what they leave out is we're actually going in a spiral, and that some of us will go up the realm, the levels of the spiral, and some will circle down out of choice. And again, this is and this can be, something of where some people wouldn't necessarily agree with me, but I believe it's a soul choice in the end, and that many of us, you can see, are either deciding to become more awake and to do, as you're saying, and I'm saying, to raise their frequency, to go into meditation, to eat the right kinds of foods, to detect all of the sort of systems put in place to keep us down, which has been going on forever. But there's also this weird dichotomy that happens with humans, that if you try to stop us from doing something or challenge us, that we will actually transcend and rise above it. We will meet the challenge. That's part of our nature, and that is the blessing of the human genome in connection with God's source, if you will. Mm-hmm. So there's the real sort of movement into, if you want to call it the future, and this is looking at time and time travel and all of this stuff. There's many levels to that, but just saying it's not a circle, it's a spiral, and we need to keep that in mind.
Very good. Speaking about that, I'm trying to find a date and time here with Cliff, but we're going to talk about Normie Land being dead here, and also this idea of the vortex of time. So we're going to talk about that spiral there. Kerry, I think you're right on point.
I didn't answer the COVID part. So let me say that as far as I'm concerned, and I did a great deal of study, a great deal of shows and articles, and really a great deal of research that involved doctors. And I interviewed, a fair number of doctors, the ones that would talk to me, and there were many that wouldn't. Yeah. But I can tell you that I learned a great deal about COVID, the nature of what was being rolled out. And I also have followed my whistleblower information, which is rather different than what other people have. So one of the things has to do with, and I've said this many times, the nano graphene oxide. Now, that's not the only type of nano that is part of this package that was delivered into humanity and that they volunteered to have shot into their systems, right? So that was the final coup de grace. It began with, by the way, chemtrails that did include the nano graphene oxide.
Barium, the aluminum. Yeah.
And I do a whole presentation on this for what it's worth a few years ago with slides and so on. I stumbled on a very excellent researcher's slides from 2010, believe it or not, that was detailing industry's investment in nanotechnology and nano specifically. Nanographene oxide. And you need to, everyone needs to look up nanographene oxide and see that it is considered to be the strongest material on Earth. So that's a great story. And I don't want to take all the time with this, but if you look into it, and I've got very special whistleblowers, and I would say my top whistleblowers, which is David Adair, for example, who's an expert not only on AI, but he is a rocket scientist, and he has worked in black projects in his sort of trajectory, although he has rebelled against the government time and time again. So he's an interesting guy. He's still alive, thank God. And he has detailed on one of my shows with him recently, by recent, I mean probably in the last year or so, how the nanographene oxide becomes a building block for changing the nature of the cell, for moving us from a carbon-based life form to silicon. And this is part of the transhuman agenda. And this is also what the AI, which can use, yes, 5G and the other frequencies, but actually it goes beyond that because it's not dependent on frequency. I think there's some confusion there. And what I was told by a black project scientist who works for NASA behind the scenes is that the nanographene oxide jumps from person to person. So it's not shedding, it's not like falling to the ground. It actually jumps, and it jumps from thing to thing, person to person. And this is very graphic, but it's graphically sort of demonstrated in the Michael Crichton sci-fi novel called Prey that he wrote before his death, and they killed him, I think. I believe they killed him. He was a doctor who decided not to follow medicine, instead to write these sci-fi novels. He wrote Jurassic Park and all of these other Andromeda Strain, I think in the early days, and so on and so forth. So Prey is actually I think it should be required reading for every human on the planet at this time, because this is what we are facing. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand how nano operates. And maybe he took some poetic license, but I'm not so sure he did, because strangely, the NASA scientists didn't cite this book. I had read it years ago. I just happened to put two and two together and realized that Crichton had been, having the inside track on where we were headed and what nano was going to do in our future. And there's a lot more to nano. Nano is not all negative. There's a man named Eric Drexler who's written Radical Abundance, and there are a number of other AI scientists who are talking about what is actually possible for us as humans when we go into the nano world and use nanotech. I know they were using nanotech. For example, I was a contractor for a while at Jet Propulsion Lab. And so I sort of tapped into the fact that they were, because I'm a sort of psychic intuitive, that they were even back then using nano. So this development is very important. Like I said, it's part of our food, our water, our clothing. It's actually everywhere now. And so, but the difference is when people decided they would accept the jab, being shot up with this stuff, that's like mainlining anything, right? You have a different effect.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. Thank you for bridging all of that together. I know that's a lot of information for the audience to take in here, but I want both our guests here to be able to speak and to share the information they have so that we have a bigger understanding here and we could put all the pieces of the puzzle together and collectively. Jim, on this idea of humanity being at the crossroads, you and I have done many shows before. A lot of your hat trick letter reports have focused on COVID in the last year, on the genocide itself, the agenda there, the coercion of the population, but also the incentive and the financial incentive that came with this particular pandemic. On one hand, we had the incentive to kill at the hospital level, and we also had the incentive. To lie and to promulgate this virtue signaling over this last year. We've seen a lot of pressure on humanity on that front. And this incentive with respect to the money also is perhaps more important in your area of expertise. Also in 2019, you and I were talking about how the repo market was crashing. So something happened in 2008, started to rear its ugly head again in 2019. And suddenly with COVID, they were able to very temporarily perhaps remove some of the pressure here on the financial system as they continue to prepare their plan B or their exit here for what perhaps is the QSF or the white hat version of all of that. Jim, bridging the money aspect here of COVID and how we were caught into this loop here, and it's more than just the genocide of the population, but also financial coup d'etat of sorts here, setting up towards this new financial digital ID AI future of ours. Jim.
Wow, big task. You know, we didn't bring in the word deception. A lot of people decided to inject their arms with the mainline poison and gene therapy, and most people don't even know what gene therapy means. But they were deceived. They were told that there was a SARS virus, and then they called that COVID, which was bullshit. It's SARS. And they wanted protection from something that really wasn't prevalent or present or dangerous. Why would you need a global vaccination plan for a 99.7% recovery infection? It's nonsense. Okay. Pardon me. I got a lump. I've had trouble with my voice the last few days. I apologize, but I can't do anything about it. The financial incentives have been tremendous, and so have the disincentives. I call it the two-headed fascist monster. In 9/11, we saw the banker monster, the Patriot Act. Okay, that's the banker head to the fascist New World Order. Well, in 2020, we saw the doctor head to the now two-headed fascist monster to introduce the New World Order. And what I find ironic is that they placated the bankers with the COVID stimulus plan. There were two of them. The total was $9 trillion, and it had an 18-month quiet, what do you call it, no talk clause. I don't know what you want to call it, but there was no publicity on the nature and the details of the COVID stimulus for the big bankers for 18 months, and that means they can't do it again. So the bankers are dying now.
And by the way, Jim, here in Canada, a lot of our members of parliament are asking to see those contracts. And in order for them to actually read the contracts now, they have to sign non-disclosure agreements for the rest of their lives. Of course, they're allowed to see the documents, but they can never speak about it. So clearly there's something there that we don't know that suggests the direction you're taking there. Go ahead.
Let's not leave out the $100,000 incentive for the hospitals. If they diagnose and label it on the chart and in the medical system, AMA, if they call it a COVID case, which is bullshit because that's just a covert vaccination identification, artificial intelligence 19 AI, they got $100,000, but they couldn't deviate from the protocol. So they had to follow through with the remdesivir, follow through in all the different incentives and protocol plans. Respirators in order to kill the person. So I call the hospitals roach motels now. You go in, you don't go out. Okay. I have a couple of colleagues, and they're very dear to me. They're very special. One's older and one's younger. One is extraordinarily experienced in the world of business, and the other one is a doctorate in sciences. And they have researched for 2 years the vaccine, the immune system, what is it, ADE, antibody deficiency. I can't remember the full name, but it's kind of like the Trojan horse hijacking your immune system and weakening it. It's one of the characteristics. These two guys, colleagues of mine, have provided me a lot of information. It's like, hey, Jim, we haven't talked in a couple of weeks. Let's do a call. Let's call by, WhatsApp, and I want to give you a lowdown for an hour. And it's just amazing stuff. I've learned a lot. I try to impress upon the less educated types that this is gene therapy, and it's to rip out their immune system. It's to rip it out. I say, well, tell your friend that he's now got AIDS. In Spanish, it's called SIDA, S-I-D-A. You say SIDA, people go, oh, okay, that's the AIDS for the Spanish world. My college roommate, Bruce, from a blue state in the Northeast, is now dead. I warned him in July. I said, don't listen to your doctors, Bruce. They're going to kill you. No, Jim, I just have a weak immune system now after the boosters. It must be the variants. Must be the variants.
COVID. It's long COVID, Jim.
And I said, Bruce, it's an extension of your New York Times moron symptoms. You believe your doctors. Anyway, he said, I'm going to get the maximum protection I can, and you're very reckless, Jim. You're reckless, and you're kind of abusive. And I said, well, comes with the territory. This is war. I'm not a nice person anymore. So be it. Okay, there's a lot of incentive. I think what they're trying to do. Now, I appreciate your perspective, Kerry, and I try to take it in. Some of it's difficult for me. Not saying I reject it. I said it's difficult to absorb. Very difficult. I try not to watch David Wilcock. I get overwhelmed. Okay. What I think on our planet, I do have something to say about, off-planet. It's off-planet transactions. I heard a very well-informed colleague of mine say that XRP has been chosen to be the interplanetary payment system. So get used to it. Okay, I believe on our planet, I call them the cabal, Kerry. I just call them the cabal, the banksters, the globalist cabal. I've gotten away from banksters because they now have a second head in the doctors. But there's really a third head in the narcos, and the narcos control the press. And there's a fourth head in the Marxists. So you've got an axis made in hell of those four groups. And they're not politically aligned. Their only political union is they want to kill the United States and take over the globe for power. But what I believe the globalist goal is to make our species more malleable, more docile, and programmable. When we pull out those long strands at the mortuaries, the funeral homes, they're antenna, and our bodies are building them. And I love your point about graphene, and I think of it as nanometals, nano heavy metals, but probably nano graphene too. I mean, it's in the chemtrails, and so's benzene, and so's aluminum. I have a client who lives near Mount Shasta, California. Aluminum levels are like 100 times higher. Okay, so that's to slow down the brain, and I think to harm the pineal gland. Fluoride, aluminum, they both work. More fluoride than aluminum, but aluminum does a real number on your brainstem. They're trying to make us programmable. I have a client, and he's in Arizona. He's close to 80 years old. He's a great guy. He bugs me, but I love you, Charlie. And he took the vaccine and regrets it, but it's a long story. I don't want to get into it. His wife and he are both vaccinated. I have a new term, Jean-Claude. I call it vaccinated. I don't say vaccinate. Vaccinate is 2 C's. Vaccine is 2 X's. You got vaccinated. He heard voices in the middle of the night, and he said, Jim, I think they're turning on their 5G radio. And I said, what are they saying, Charlie? And he said, well, it's more like a buzz and like watered down music. Okay, they're trying out. They're doing tests now for how successful the public is to respond to 5G messaging, noise, and music. I think they're trying to convert us into a dumb, obedient, humanoid cyborg. And you know, you hear that term, Homo sapiens, no, what do you call it? Homo Borg Genesis, not Homo sapiens. They're getting rid of the sapiens. They're getting rid of the thinking part. I was a big Star Trek fan. I don't mind admitting this, but at 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday, a bunch of us in the dormitory would get together and we'd get stoned. I mean, we would light it up. And then we'd watch Star Trek, and then we'd go for dinner. You know, misspent youth, but so what? I've come to learn later.
I'm a doctor, not a YouTuber.
No, okay, I'm going to come up with the line, there is no resistance. We are the Borg. Resistance is futile. Yeah. We are the Borg. And what was the name of Jean-Claude? I'm sorry. What was
Borg? Locutus of Borg.
Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc's was Lucretius. What was it?
Of Borg.
Locutus. Yeah. And the other Borg who reverted back to human was Jerry. What was her name?
7 of 9.
Yeah, I have a buddy who bumped into her in West Virginia, and he said she's still gorgeous. Anyway, they're trying to make us into Borg, and they're trying, I think, to make us connected with Bluetooth or something. You know, the MAC addresses in the cemetery. Wake up, people! You got MAC addresses of dead people, and your cell phone is identifying them as a communicatable entity in the grave. Okay, I get all worked up. Pardon me. Luciferase is also in the injection. And from what I understand, and I don't ever boast to have complete comprehension of this, I believe luciferase is king cobra chromosome. I'm not sure about that. Okay, it's going to be tied with the smart city. We haven't brought that up. I think the smart city is a kill zone. I think it's going to be a bit of a roach motel. Thousands coming in. Hey, wait a minute. The population should be higher. It's much less than what it should be. Yeah, because people are being killed and taken underground to get out. I don't mean alive. I mean dead bodies. It's a kill zone. That's what I expect. Okay, COVID is the most nefarious project in the history of mankind. It is the most audacious genocide in the history of mankind, and it is coupled with the economic lockdown, which is the most illicit, improper quarantine in the history of mankind. I got some trivia for you guys. What's the origin of the word quarantine?
Quarantaine.
40 days. That's what they did in Venice when they suspected that someone on board the ships were with the plague, so they had to stay in the port for 40 days and do a quarantine. I learned something the hard way. Someone said, "Oh, I'm going to be on vacation. I'm going to do a quarantena." I said, "You're sick?" And he said, "No, just 40 days." Quarantena is 40-day trip, 40-day event. Okay.
Hey, Jim. Before we finish this segment on the COVID thing, you have been tracking these hospitals that are at risk of closure, and you talked about some of the intelligence coming up that we're moving into, and this perhaps is a white hat op also, the exposure of the hospitals, as you talked about here, the incentive to kill, the remdesivir, the respirators, in order to switch them over to perhaps a new healthcare system that could include med beds. Let's do a quick roundtable on that one, and then we'll jump to the next segment. Both you and Kerry, let's talk about the med beds here and what perhaps is happening around the corner here with our hospitals. First, you, Jim, take the next 2 minutes, and then I'll ask Kerry to chime in.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking me for a 2-minute version?
Yes, please.
No, I'm not trying to make fun. You want a short? A short? I can do short.
On what's happening to our hospital systems.
I can do short.
Your insiders are telling you about the investments that are happening right now behind the scenes.
Okay. All right. Here's the irony. The banks are going bankrupt now because they suffered a tremendous loss of revenue while they were empty during the pandemic.
The hospitals, you mean? You said banks.
Hospital. What did I say?
You said banks. We'll get to the banks
Oh,
later.
gosh. Yeah. Okay. The hospitals had a big problem, and they got the $100,000 payoff for the COVID cases. But the hospitals, following the COVID cases, they pushed aside the cancer cases. And those are big money makers. So a lot of people died who could have had cancer surgery and treatment. But the hospitals suffered a bankruptcy deadly event sequence after the lockdown from being empty. I can't say that without laughing. I'm a funny guy. I have my yeah. I saw that recently. And the nurse, there are a lot of different dance routines like that. Okay. So I talked a year ago about how the West Wing of the hospitals was being occupied and taken over by contract by Trump contracts. And they were installing med beds. And there was no passage from the 3 other wings to the West Wing. They closed that off. And then I came to learn, oh my gosh, Trump has bought 300 to 500 hospitals. And then I got the climax from a military source who gave me a big lowdown at the end of February and the early March. Big lowdown. A former elite sniper, lots of information. He said, Jim, Trump and his cohorts, they got a group now. I'll end right here. They've got a group, their investment group, and they have several corporations. They're building 1,000 med beds a day. They're building 250,000 med beds per year. And harken back to the August or so 2020 event, south of Chicago, northern Indiana. It was supposed to be a press campaign stump for Trump. And it was about super chip plant, telecom chip plant. Well, they did some telecom chip. They did satellite chip. But Trump wanted the press corps to mingle at lunch and at coffee with the workers at the plant because it got word got out. It was also a chip console plant for med beds. Med bed console chips at that site. Trump wanted that to get out, and it got out. Now there are dozens, if not hundreds, of med bed plants. They're the big part, the hard part is the brain, and I hear the wand is not so difficult. They got the. Keep in mind, light is matter. Keep in mind, never lose track of that. I'll pass.
Kerry, just as you said at the beginning of the show, that the White Hats are probably competing with their financial system here to perhaps compete with what the Khazarian Mafia or the Illuminati are trying to implement here with their CBDCs, their centralized banking digital currencies. So too might be the case here with the healthcare systems on the
Medicine.
planet. Here we're seeing fingerprints in the mainstream news that something is not right here with our hospitals. Of course, we could show more videos of people dancing there during the pandemic, but clearly there's something there. Where does that lead in terms of perhaps a white hat operation, or perhaps this new technology of med beds and anything else coming up into our human consciousness here, Kerry?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to clarify one thing, that none of my information comes from David Wilcox. So if you have trouble with him, and with all due respect to him, I'm just saying that's not where my information comes from. The other thing is that I have back in, God, what year was this? I don't know, 2020 maybe. I've written an article, or actually a few articles, called Homo Borg Genesis, the Transhuman Agenda. And that is on my website. I can show my screen and show people the article if they're interested, but I don't necessarily need to take the time here. So just to go on my site, just search Borg and you're going to find lots of articles about this. But yes, this is, okay, Captain Mark Richards is in prison in Solano Prison, California. And his father and his grandfather all worked in the secret space program. He was put in jail, framed up for a murder he didn't commit. He was supposed to be a mastermind. Actually, it was a pedophile that was killed by 3 young men, one of which had been we know that he had been what do you call, damaged by pedophilia when he was a young child. So, and he did go to jail. 2 of the young men did not go to jail. One completely disappeared, as far as I know, and one of them just got off charges completely. So Mark is in prison. He says what they're building is a race of passive super soldiers. That is their plan. And what they want to do is they want to go off planet. So this is why they need. So you have to understand, what is the agenda? It is a kind of a superhuman agenda. It goes all the way back to the Nazis. And by the way, the medical tyranny is what we're dealing with here. So that goes back to the Nazis as well, and before. But we can most in this, time, center on the Nazis, the Project Paperclip scientists, as I think Jim mentioned earlier in the show. And there is a long litany of information about that. And by the way, here we are in surface Earth discussing all the things that are being rolled out by what I call the dark side, interchangeably Illuminati, the Cabal, whatever. They are working with the secret space program, and they are also represented in the secret space program in underground bases, underground cities, and these go throughout the Earth. And these do link up with going off planet, colonizing other planets. This is the plan, okay? They have a long-range plan. It involves a human race that is totally programmable, is under their control, and can, again, go from cyborg actually to androids. So Battlestar Galactica is right on point. And we're talking about colonizing other planets. And this plan is well underway. So, and we have bases and what's going on the moon and Mars and beyond. So there's a huge story, and these are the kinds of things I cover. But to get back to that and just sort of overview that so that you understand kind of where this whole thing is coming from. Again, to make a race of passive human super soldiers. That's actually, and Mark is a military man, a captain in the Navy since he was a young man. So I interviewed him for, I've done 12 interviews for over 2 hours each, and in the prison, and I have done this for over 5 years. All of that is available on my website. So to get back to this situation, John Claude, I wanted to cover that really quickly to give the overview.
Yes, and just so you know, I also gave the link here to your Homo Borg Genesis articles on Project Camelot. They're in the live stream now, guys, if you want to click on the hot link.
So in essence, what we're talking about is that when you have the nanographene oxide and these other There are other nanometals in there. This package that involves spike proteins that is actually attracted to the nano, and they link together. Okay, and then it jumps. So you understand that there's not just the nano jumping. This is, again, according to a NASA scientist. So we're talking about a plan that has, in other words, they think they are doing the right thing for the future of humanity in their sort of demented minds. They don't care about collateral damage. That's not their issue. As far as Trump and the med beds, yes, that is a real plan of Trump's. I can testify to that. And I know a particular person who has been selected by Trump, signed a contract with him to head up that program. So that's a very real program. Now, when it is ever going to be allowed to be rolled out is when this battle, or this war really, that we're engaged in at this exact moment takes, is decided. However, we have some extenuating circumstances as to whether it will be decided. Now, I don't know, I may be missing some of your question here, but I just want to say that earlier, Jim Willie talks about the financial system, the plans to, for the yuan and all of that. But it's important to understand that according to I have some very, very, very top whistleblower financial guys, okay, that consult with me now and then. I can tell you one of them actually was deeply involved in the Bush administration, the Bush senior administration, for what it's worth. And I have been told also that not only the right to issue is something they're never going to let go of, so I'm not sure how the White Hats are going to handle that, but two, we're talking about the families in Basel, Switzerland, and then we're talking about the off-planet controllers of those families and bloodlines. So the problem with the financial system is it doesn't just reside on Earth. It also, the reins to it actually are handled off planet.
And I did a show about this
a
few years ago, Kerry, when we talked about the fact that we don't live in an enclosed system. That in fact, if we don't take the ET component, we cannot understand the financial system here and what's happening on the planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I have gotten involved with the White Hats deep enough to where I know that they are using an AI, that they're fully aware of everything I am saying here. And whether they don't want it out there necessarily at this time because they want people to focus on things like voting. Okay. But the reality is that we are all part of a much larger system of systems, right? Mm-hmm. And so that none of these things are isolated from each other. The other thing is that we're really looking at a future that involves, again, nano and AI. And I think when you talk about the financial system, you cannot ignore the fact that that first of all, we have a planetary AI. There's another level of AI that's intergalactic, that's actually taken over the system, one of the galaxies next to us, that is incoming, according to the remote viewers and under Courtney Brown and others as well, that is basically intent on taking over this system of systems, which is our solar system, et cetera. And that this is a very real threat, that we have also rogue AI. So I'm told, at least by Mark Richards several years ago, that we had 4 AIs incoming to this planet that did not have, quote unquote, our best interests at heart. Then we have a planetary AI, one of which is derived from humans who actually got it from aliens anyway. And I can talk about that, the Nazca alien story, and so on. But the point being is that our financial system is out of control of the humans already. It is not. We have already met the singularity. Elon and these people that are saying we got to rein in AI are just lying. They know damn well that AI is out of control. And I know this from my whistleblowers, from people like Mark Richards, who have told me years ago now that the generals had to acknowledge that the AIs were already out of their control, the ones they were working with. And there's one small story, I think I can fit it in here very quickly.
Okay.
Basically, they had an AI that was given a mission somewhere like in Iraq to bomb something or whatever it was. And the AI destroyed itself rather than carry out the mission. It was choosing that. Okay.
Whoa.
Knew at that moment that they could not trust the AIs. So generals cannot trust information from other generals who are relying on other AI information. And there's also reason to believe that both the dark and the light are perhaps under the control of the same AI. So this is a big story. It has many aspects. You may not want to agree with me on some of these, but I have to tell you that we cannot talk about the financial system without bringing in the AIs, because that's where we're at now.
Kerry, before we bring Jim in on this, talk about the world of unacknowledged special access programs and where all the money is going. Because again, if we're going to build this race to go into space, we have to build that infrastructure. Talk about where that money went, and then we'll get into the black swan effect now.
Okay, well, one of the people that actually was not very up to speed, but she was Secretary of Housing. I forget if it was under Reagan or Nixon.
Catherine Austin Fitts.
Catherine Austin Fitts. And I've interviewed her back in the early days, and I could tell you reluctantly she got into this sector. But what she has done now, and she was very well educated in part by Rich Dolan, if you know who he is, who wrote some important volumes called UFOs in the National Security State, and proves beyond any shadow of doubt, as far as I'm concerned, that that these things we call UFOs or UAPs and the secret space program completely exists, that it has gone rogue, that it has been operating under our feet and under our noses and behind our backs forever, really going back to even before the Nazis, by the way, around 1930s. You can look back there. And so bottom line is that they have been developing technology that is easily 10,000 years in advance of where we are now on the surface Earth. And that some of that technology is being fed into these corporations all around us. And Elon is just one of the water carriers for that technology. He's also a misdirect because he's bringing in things that are actually not the right technologies, like the Tesla electric cars, which are going to go by the wayside in the future. They're completely useless. They're also very detrimental to the environment and to our physical bodies, by the way, for the drivers, and so on. So we're looking at a very complex story, but I do want to say that what has happened is that because we have in a sense two parallel tracks for humanity. One involved in the secret space program, where those individuals are going to work every day in an underground basis and so on, and going off planet and dealing with technology again that's way in ahead of what we have. And I have so many whistleblowers on this subject, it's ridiculous. And the other is that humanity that we're talking about here that conducts wars with old-fashioned tanks and bombs and all nonsense. And yes, the nuclear threat, I think this is a bucket term. It is not literally about nukes. So when I think 107, who has to be very careful in the way he talks and what he's able to disclose, when he's saying that we're under threat from whether it be Russia or actually more likely NATO inside NATO and or China from attack. I think you have to keep in mind that they also do have access and know about the secret space program, have to deal with the secret space program, because some of our officials on surface are obviously working with the secret space program behind the scenes. Right. So again, this also factors in to whether we will be allowed to have a better financial system than the one we have currently been under, which is basically a system of slavery. slavery. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Kerry, setting the stage and also bringing up Catherine Austin Fitz there. Jim, you and I talked about one of her reports and the missing money at the Pentagon. Of course, we can get into 9/11 and all that. But essentially, what Catherine was saying was that every time she dug and she followed the money trail, she would bang up against some ET information or alien or space alien information. Now, as we're seeing the target move closer and closer now to this push comes to shove moment for the financial system battle or the control of the financial system here on the planet, can you talk about some of these black swan events that you're following in the last couple of months here? And let's talk about this Project Sandman. In Kerry's last interview with us, Janon, they went into some detail about this world push now towards de-dollarization. And you and I have been talking about reaching a critical mass or escape velocity here in the last number of years as we've been following that. But it appears we're here and now. Speak to, first of all, what's happening now, what you see perhaps on the horizon with the bond crisis, and how perhaps that ties in also to what Catherine was saying, where all of this money laundering, all of this skimming off of the top of humanity has to go somewhere. Where did it go? Do we have access to go and grab those assets and bring them back perhaps on Earth? Where did all this money go, Jim, and why are we fighting right now? What do you see on the horizon?
You know, we've got a deficit, U.S. government debt of about, I don't know, 31 trillion. And just leave the future obligations, leave that to the side, because that's not money spent, that's money promised. But we got something like $32 trillion in debt. And I believe that a good, I don't know, a quarter of it, like 6-8 trillion is part of fraud. But we do not know how much other money was printed because we have no basis for money. We don't know how much other money was printed for financing the Space Force and platforms. You mentioned the moon and Mars. I've got word that there's a moon of Jupiter that's a major base. And here's a funny thing about Jupiter. And this is a real shocker to me 18 months ago when I was talking with a client. And he said, Jim, are you aware of the magnetic field at the pole of Jupiter? And I said, no, but isn't it basically a rock of methane ice? And he said, no, not at all. It's methane gas. I said, well, why does it not blow up? And he didn't have a good answer to that. Let's leave that alone. Maybe it's methane in a stable form. I don't want to get into that. My point is that the pole is so heavily magnetic that they've got 700 degrees on much of the planet so that the moons are warm. They don't have an atmosphere, but there's a base there. I think I've been told that's where the galactic police are located. I don't want to get lost in that.
You're talking about solar warding?
Gosh, I cannot remember his name. I remember his face, but not his name. He has a hyphen in his name.
No, the program is called Solar Warden.
Yeah,
yes.
the Galactic Police is Solar Warden.
Galactic
Oh, Solar Warden. Okay, I heard that they call it.
Suggesting, just to bring this back to context for the audience members who are just maybe joining us, this brings us back to Trump and the Space Force here. A lot of people were suggesting that he was simply putting on the books what was off books perhaps for 70 years or maybe even longer.
Yeah.
And what was interesting last year, again, you and I covered this, Jim, the former Israeli space chief admitting here that extraterrestrials did exist, that Trump knew about it, that he had contracts with them, that we had bases on Mars and the moon, and there was such a thing here as a galactic federation. Again, seeing fingerprints here in mainstream news about what Kerry and Jim are talking about. Jim, keep going here on how that ties in your mind here. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm not sure how it all ties in. I'm modest when it comes to my limitations. I know where my boundary is. I don't know how it ties in. I have a feeling that the mRNA vaccine is to remove the dumbest, most gullible, and worthless people on the planet. That's a pretty tall order, because they're not going to have a role later on. They don't qualify. Okay. I am focused on, our planetary crisis, our monetary issue. And, the more I heard you guys talk, it sounded like the BRICS Union are going to be interrupted, obstructed, and maybe sabotaged and given a really bad time of resistance all along the way for their pathway toward an honest system. And by honest system, I mean, large vaults of gold, like over 50,000 tons, 100,000 tons in maybe 4 or 5 locations around the world, our planet. I'm starting to say globe now, not world, because our world is our little blue orb. That's our world. And I agree, there is life elsewhere. There is a lot of life elsewhere. I had one client who told me that he had connections with a friend who knew somebody, and they were close friends of Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek. So it was like 3 degrees of separation. He said Roddenberry said that everything on Star Trek was true. Everything was true. I was very fascinated by the food replicator, the teleporter, and the universal translator. I could really use that now when I get into heated arguments with these idiot Latinos. Okay, my focus
had connections with naval intelligence, so that's where they were getting a lot of these ideas for the show. Instead of the interruption about BRICS, you just mentioned being interrupted. Perhaps the word is more usurped. If we're thinking about an off-world control, would you say usurp instead?
I hope they don't get usurped, because they are non-dollar. They are violently anti-dollar. They are making alliances. They're eliminating the dollar. They're not going to a equally corrupt other type of dollar. They're talking about gold and gold-based central bank digital currencies. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm focusing on right now is the dumping of the treasuries and the largest transfer of wealth in history from treasury bonds to gold. Mm-hmm. How are they going to manage the sale of the treasury bonds? I'm researching this and I'm making progress. It's not easy. Some of it is speculation. I do my best I can. And who's going to provide all the gold for all those countries that want to dump their treasuries? Like just say South Korea dumping tomorrow $10 billion.
Just explain to the audience members here, you're talking about currency swaps here as these treasury bonds are hitting the shore of the United States, and we're exporting that inflation back outwards. Explain that to the people who haven't seen this episode.
Okay. If you have a country, I like South Korea because they're a good, strong country, but they're not running Asian policy. They're participating. They're a major player in ASEAN. But, they're not Japan. They're not China. They're not Taiwan. South Korea, they have the Hyundai, Samsung, and LG. Pardon me. I've got, they got 3 big conglomerates they call Kaibols. Kaibol. Okay. If they're selling $10 billion worth of treasuries, that is not going to be done in the open market. That'll have to be done with the Fed, which is really an adjunct of the Department of Treasury. So I'll try to make this short, Jean-Claude, because I could go on an hour. I could go on 40 minutes without any trouble at all. These countries
people can go see. I put the reference video. People can go see the whole thing. Just explain quickly what you mean about the exportation.
The synopsis. The Fed, as an adjunct to the Department of Treasury, will say we'll handle that privately. Don't do that in the open market. It'll shut down the market. It's too big a sale order. So the Fed would say, all right, we have dollars, and that's where it immediately has a problem. No, we're selling the treasury bonds because we don't want the dollars. So don't give us dollars. Don't be stupid. So we would then do a dollar swap and give them Korean won. And here's where a wrinkle comes in that I did not cover before. To do a dollar swap in non-dollar at that volume and that regularity, there will have to be a bond haircut.
Yeah.
They're going to take like a 30% haircut. I heard something, and I cannot verify this. I just heard it once and no more. I heard they're getting 40 cents on the dollar now. 40 cents. Okay. We're seeing a bond default in progress. Okay. Now, a lot of people are saying, good analysts are saying, think of all those dollars that are coming home. The treasury bonds are coming home. No, they're not. The Fed and the Department of Treasury is going to soak it up. They're going to develop a big bad bank. It's going to be called the Federal Reserve. The bad bank is going to be the Federal Reserve, expanding by double their balance sheet eventually. And we send yuan back to Korea. We send euro to France. We send real to Saudi. We're not going to see a flood of dollars in the United States. We're going to export that money. If the treasury bonds were held in those other countries, that's precisely where they're going to receive their currencies. They're not going to take that 10 billion of U.S. Treasury bonds and say, I know it's U.S. denominated, so we're going to spend it in the United States and reindustrialize your crappy nation. They're trying to get out. So we're going to export the treasuries, the funds back to France, back to Saudi, back to Korea, and they're going to go shopping. I think 3/4 of the money, they'll buy gold.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the takeaway here is two big questions. How much will the Fed absorb onto their balance sheet before that creates a real bad image problem? And who's going to supply the gold for the buyers who are dumping treasuries? And I'm telling you, it's Russia, China, maybe Persia, Iran, and a fourth country that you got to sign up for the hat trick letter to find out about. I'm tired of giving everything away. I undercut my own newsletter by being a big fat blabbermouth. There are going to be a few countries that provide gold, and they're going to do so partly out of goodwill for the BRICS, so they'll have gold instead of treasuries. And they'll do it out of goodwill because they have so much gold. The Russians held back and hid, and I confirmed this with my source. He reached back into Russia to confirm this. Took him a week. It was Maxwell from Luxembourg. I hope you're hearing this, Max, and you're doing well. Contact me because I've been trying. They hid it in the Russian Orthodox churches, a couple hundred of them, in false basements and false walls, and they've recovered it all. That's why the news got out, because soldiers were trucking it out to the Ural Mountain military vault, and the troops talked, and word got out. They've got 100,000 tons, plus the Kremlin, 25,000 tons. So I'm thinking they'll volunteer to discharge 10,000 tons if the Chinese do the same, like the Golden Dragons or White Dragons. And the Persians, why are they hated so much? Because they didn't give up their 20 to 40,000 tons of gold to the Rothschilds. And they're hated and they're attacked. Stuxnet, heroin through the Afghan border, interference with their currency, you name it, we've done it. We're a nasty, nasty country for our elite controllers.
And do you think these people, these entities, opening up some of their gold reserves here for these currency swaps, do you think they're also doing that not just to favor the BRICS, but also to have maybe a seat at the table here in what they perceive to be the upcoming dismantling and the sell-off of the United States assets?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because if I had more time, if you said, don't give me the summary, I would have gone to that. I believe, no, seriously, it's in my report. I just posted it yesterday. It's in the May report. I posted it on May 32nd. One day late, I didn't quite get it in May. Okay, why would the Russians volunteer to pony up 10,000 tons of gold? Maybe they want a good supply, a good tranche of treasury bonds. Why would the white dragons pony up 10 or 20,000 tons of gold? Maybe they want a good bigger tranche of U.S. treasury bonds. Why would Persia want to put up 5 or 10,000 tons of gold so that they could get their vengeance, according to their Shiite religion, which has got a lot more vengeance laced in with their Islam branch than the more peaceful Sunnis. Okay, and with treasury bond ownership, Jean-Claude, I come back to you. They get a seat at the table as a trustee. And, you know, it's not going to be as simple as people might think. A trustee at the U.S. government debt default might enable them to take on some of the assets that the Dutch royals lost for asset seizure, for child-related crimes, according to the Omnibus Act. So at that table, you might have a large, think of it as part of the lobster exchange, could have a lot of royal and elite assets that they can buy with treasury bonds. That's an angle that very few people are thinking about.
Wow, fascinating, Jim. Let me add to that also, Kerry. In this one of our first interviews, As Above, So Below, here we're talking about some entities making some gold available here to perhaps have a bigger seat at the table to control the new map of power that is being distributed around the planet. But does this gold being available and entering the market here have something to do with the off-worlders as well? Do you see this gold trade as being perhaps all being orchestrated to remove some gold from the planet here for another purposes off-world? You mentioned Zachariah Sitchin at the beginning of the show and how part of the humanity's trajectory was to mine some of this gold here for the Anunnaki. How does that tie in perhaps on the off-world level?
Well, first of all, I want to say that very recently, Juan O'Savin said something that I have heard from some of my whistleblowers, which is that the BRICS has been completely taken over, is totally infiltrated, and it is run by the same, organization that's running the financial affairs of the planet, so that they are already taken over. So that's something you might want to look into, Jim. I have to say that gold has been going off planet, leaving via the airports in South Africa. We've had many reports of that. So we continue to ship that off to the Anunnaki and various other places and races, from what I understand. I can't really speak to what you're talking about in terms of gold in the treasuries and how that sort of shifting money scene is going to affect the system. I do know that the QFS is based on assets, and very specifically on things like gold, silver, and platinum, and various other metals and so on, and assets of countries. So the countries have to have these residuals, and whether they get paid off or there's some kind of balance going back and forth with gold, I don't know. But I do know that there's a lot more gold on the planet than has ever been released. And I don't think you've been mentioning the off-planet ledger or whatever, not the off-planet, the off-book ledger that is also part of those machines and the whole financial story. So I think when you quote numbers and so on and so forth, I'm not sure you're including that information. The other thing is that I'll give you an example of gold that is not known to the world, but has been released in certain books by this journalist called Radu Sinamar, who is from Romania. So the information came out in Romanian first, and it is part of a set of at least 5 books. But one of the things they talk about is a mountain of gold in Romania. And there's tons and tons of gold in Romania. And there is something to do with, and I don't know all of the details with this, being at the center of the earth, like of all the countries of the world, that Romania and a certain group of countries there have some kind of basis of gold under their lands and within their lands that has never been reported. So there's that. There is, in other words, whistleblowers have told me there is so much gold, and I know somebody who dealt with the gold personally, and moving it from place to place, not literally like Charlie Ward, but rather using the types of ways they move money, on sheet, off sheet, all that kind of thing. So all I'm saying is that this gold thing, I don't think you can necessarily suss it out until you really understand what the people in the secret space program and in the secret government know about these amounts, and whether or not indeed they are going to get gold for treasury notes, or how that would work out. I don't know. That's an exchange system. Maybe, again, I thought our XRP, if I know anything about it at all, has to do with being able to shift easily from one type of currency to another. So whether that factors in as a method there. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but I actually have to get off this call here pretty soon, maybe in the next 5-10 minutes at the most, because I'm having to leave my hotel room and go on the road. So sorry about that, but I think we've gone for quite a while anyway, so maybe that's right.
Perhaps we'll have a part 2, because there were still a couple of topics we wanted to discuss, including the subversion here, tactics being used against us both by the black hats and also the white hats. I think we'll leave it there, and we'll come back maybe to do a part 2 on this. I wanted to interject also that Jim and I have been following a lot of Kerry, what you're talking about here is over-the-counter derivatives and a lot of the off-ledger stuff here in a lot of episodes as well. Maybe not for today's show, but we have been looking at that for sure. How that all ties in, of course, again, goes to this idea that we do not live in an enclosed system, and it's very hard to determine whether the numbers we are told in mainstream news have any validity whatsoever. So we go with those numbers, and then we go with some of our whistleblowers and insiders. And just to back up what you were saying, in terms of the amount of gold on the planet, Kerry, you've also interviewed Big Sweer before on all of his research with all of the amounts of gold on the planet as well. And this is why he's a big proponent of silver being the most undervalued asset there as well. So guys, you can go and check out that last video he produced there. The Global Monetary Tsunami is here. You can find that on his YouTube channel.
Jean-Claude, can I jam in a question, please, before Kerry goes?
Go ahead.
Kerry, the Romanian gold, is that a vault or a naturally occurring deposit in a mountain? A vault?
Naturally occurring deposit. In other words, from what I understand, what's written about in the books is the entire mountain is gold. Okay.
And does that carry with it some kind of very extraordinary electromagnetic field?
Yes. Yes.
Gold, okay. And is that demonic? Is that demonic in any way?
It's used in space travel, and it allows you to go interdimensional. So gold is got many uses.
Okay.
And that's also where the rumors come in of ingesting the gold also to use the body to translocate.
Right. Although humans cannot benefit from that as much as they would like.
Right. Okay, guys, we're going to open up so many cans of worms here. What a great interview. Thank you so much, Jim and Kerry. What I want to do just before we go, Kerry, I'll have you first. Let's give some advice to the audience members. There's a lot of confusion. The fog of war, of course, is very thick. This is the War Correspondent show. And part of these shows are designed to not just inform the population as to what's going on and to try to have a bigger a frame of view for what's going on and the transitory nature of our reality, but also to understand their part in all of that, their sole contract, their sole mission, and how they navigate through all of this. Speak to that, Kerry, before you go. What's your advice to the audience members here as they see these crazy times unfold before them and as they become more and more cognizant of the fact that they have a bigger role in all of this than perhaps they even think? Kerry.
Okay, well, what I would say is that we are, spirits, souls having an earthly experience. So we are not physical, material beings first. That's actually the last thing we are. We are much more than this. So to keep that in mind, that in coming here, we have inhabited bodies. These bodies are temporary, and we will, if we want, reincarnate and come back. The other thing is that raising your frequency is paramount nowadays. So eating, as best you can, getting the best food, water, and also, being in nature a lot to cleanse the electronic fog that we're all, constantly online, constantly using our phones, so and so. So that is also part of it. You can. I have talked about this in other interviews. Nano, keep in mind that people tend to think of nano and AI as a one-way road. It's not. It's an interaction with us and our bodies. Therefore, we can give feedback and we can actually change the power trajectory with our relationship with those entities. So you can actually influence them to a more positive state and for your relationship with them. So that would come through meditation, understanding we have a power center that involves our brains and our hearts together that are able to send messages to the rest of our body. And if you believe somebody who is, you watch these ads that are constantly trying to make you sick and make you take all these pills and everything, these are the things that actually drag you down. You are actually allowing yourself to be programmed and taken over. So you can turn that around and you can change it by a lot of study, research, and meditation. And that, in a sense, this saying, the truth is out there, it actually is out there. It's all around us. It's in what one of our whistleblowers, a top whistleblower called Pete Peterson, talked about. He was a Black Project scientist for probably his entire life. And basically, that's what the military industrial complex refers to it as now. Other people might see it as young, the Jungian, universal mind or whatever, but it's right here. In other words, we all have access to everything and to all knowledge at any given time. It's just a matter of whether we have conditioned ourselves and taught ourselves how to access that amazing amount of information that can save your life, by the way.
And this
And
is
I
why Kerry and I
about
got
the
in
Richard
trouble
Allen
when
Miller thing about recently. I mean, I got a call like 3 days ago from this physicist. He's a major physicist who's worked again in Black projects for like 40 years of his life or more. And he is something of a rebel. I've done many interviews with him, but I did one somewhere less than a year ago. My entire website was taken offline for 6 days. And as a result of that interview, he recently called me up and said that the government had just contacted him saying that the core of the earth had stopped again, and that he had predicted that through some mathematics and work that he did years ago. And so they were contacting him basically saying, what do we do? And this is where I started out this show talking about the Alex Jones disclosures about Zuckerberg and building these hideaways in underground bases, which the rich has been doing for many, many years before this as well. But apparently this is a new sort of wave of that having to do with Kauai. And Kauai, by the way, is a heavy duty American military site. So important to actually add that in there. The Chinese have tried to make inroads, but when I went there just recently, actually like a week or two ago, I noticed that the Chinese presence on that island has been removed, largely removed as a result of this sort of growing antipathy with China. And that's a whole thing and having to do with whether there's really an alliance, whether indeed Putin is working to get rid of the biolabs in the underground bases, and where are they going? Because it's very likely they're on maglev trains on the way to the underground in America, and all that will be preserved by the secret space program. etc. So, they may clean house over in the Ukraine, but they'll bring it back over to our. So I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot right here. I know I have to go. So thank you very much for having me on the show. Jim, Willie, it's such a pleasure to listen to you and to hear, your take on the areas that you do know, which you know very deeply. And so I'd love to have you on as my guest sometime if you're willing.
I'm all for that.
I'll exchange the contact information.
Okay, and thank you, Jean-Claude, for making this possible. And let's do a part 2. That would be wonderful.
For sure. And folks, in the meantime, if you want to dive into a little bit more of what Kerry was just talking about now, about your soul mission here and how to connect with that, you can buy the book here, The Rebel Gene, on Amazon.com. And you can also follow Kerry's work here at projectcamelotportal.com. Kerry, if you have to go, thank you so much for being here. And yes, I'll send you an email. We'll do a part 2, and I'll continue here with the outro with Mr. Willie. Thank you so much, Kerry, for being on. What a great show. Thank you.
All right. Bye, Kerry.
Bye. Jim, last words of wisdoms here before we go. Also, the same advice here on how to navigate all of this. Of course, it's very convoluted. We're understanding here that we're being thrown into this fight. It is a very, how do you say that? Multipolar or multi-directional. What's that translation? Full encompassing? What am I looking for?
I don't know.
Meaning you're being attacked by every side. I'm not. I'm not finding the word in English.
I have a quote from one of my buddies in Europe. It's all asymmetric bullshit coming at us from all angles.
That's good too. I was going to say full spectrum dominant.
Full spectrum. Yeah. Full spectrum dom. That's a Cheney term. I got a comment on something. I'm not going to get really vitriolic or negative, but this point about the BRICS being infiltrated by the same group, the bankster cabal, I think that is a very difficult argument to convince of and to swallow upon hearing. Mm-hmm. Iran has been tortured by the dollar managers for 30 years. Mm-hmm. The Chinese, I got to say this, the Chinese are two types. They're two types, and they're battling each other in China for control. Think of it as the Chinese Communist Party on the political side and the Chinese Army Corporation on the capitalist side. Mm-hmm. Now, if they're a member of the BRICS, then and they're going to be infiltrated, then that would mean that the war between the Davos globalists and the Golden Dragons is fake. And I don't think it's fake.
To some extent, I have to agree with you. We're trying to wrap our heads around this, but for the longest time, if you go to a smaller macro level, you could say, well, the Republicans versus the Democrats are always fighting each other, but then you realize both wings belong to the same bird, right? So is it possible that on the bigger scale also this is happening? I don't know. More time will tell. More analysts, more analytical thoughts and review here by Mr. Jim Willie will definitely help. Jim, in terms of managing all this, what can people do right now? I know it's a bit late in the game.
Okay, are you trying to wrap this up? Because I could say a few more things.
Oh, let's go a little bit longer.
Okay.
Or do that, and we'll do the part two. We'll do the part 2 with Kerry as well.
I believe that Russia has been given a commission to destroy the biolabs and to destroy the, let's just call them baby factories in Ukraine, and the money laundering centers and the child trafficking centers. I think Russia, on a divine mission, a mission toward good. You know, the Russian Orthodox Church is not satanic. Mm-hmm. It's not like the Vatican. So I believe the Russians are in a cleanup project, a huge commission, and they bankrupted the Davos crowd. And that's why immediately we had the Biden crew come up with Ukraine aid. It was exactly when the Russians smashed the underground money laundering centers. And it's not just that. You had Credit Suisse that's in tremendous problems. So the Russians did damage and vengeance to the Swiss bankers. Yeah. Are you trying to tell me, or would the argument be made that the Russians are part of the New World Order and they're just playing a role? The Persians are reacting to a generation of sabotage and Stuxnets and heroin from the Russian, from the Afghan northern border. The Persians are just playing a role. Okay, I will say one thing. Ayatollah Khomeini, he lived in Paris. So what the heck was he doing in Paris? And did he have any connection to the U.S. security boys in Langley?
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer to that, but I suspect that he was playing a role. They created an enemy state with Persia/Iran. I hear from this one guy. I love you. You know, you're great. You provide me information. They prefer to be called Persia. I'm not even sure where Iran came in as a name. I'm not a historian like that. But okay, there's more. They're developing additional members in the BRICS, and in order to win favor for membership, they have to get rid of the dollar and dump their treasuries. Well, that's going to cause some tremendous problems, not just for the U.S. economy. It's going to cause tremendous problems for all the different Davos and banksters and globalists who have dollar savings accounts. Okay, what are they going to do? Langley is different. Langley is so diversified. They bought the entire Colombian nation banking system. So that's not dollar, but the Colombian narcotics cartel, they are dollar-based in their narcotics savings and their sales. But just as central banks do acquisition of treasury bonds or other assets and save in the form of treasuries, so do narcotics management funds that operate under different names that we don't really recognize, except for BlackRock.
BlackRock.
Yeah. Okay. We're on the same wavelength. Okay. Yeah. You know, maybe in time the BRICS would evolve and get infiltrated, but I don't think they're going to be infiltrated at their inception. I don't think so. And I'm going to check further. I'm going to go further with that.
No, thank you for that. And I appreciate it because it's food for thought. That's why we're doing these shows. And to some extent too, you know, we always have that saying, you and I have been talking about this for a while, like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. For now, the new boss doesn't look like the old boss, as you just well described. But at the same time, you know, every time we fleece humanity, this is a recurring cycle on the planet. They fleece us and they change over the system to something that's more fair for a while so that, you know, we want to buy into it. So clearly something has to happen here where if they are going to have the buy-in of humanity, either they're going to use a lot of force to get it, or they're going to try to present something that is more equitable, more fair than perhaps the old system was. How long that lasts until the fleecing starts again, that's perhaps the
I don't know. Let me make a point along those lines. Yeah. We may see Russia, China, and Iran, Persia, producing a gold-backed CBDC. And let's see if in 2, 3, or 5 years it's corrupted and it's really not gold-backed. And then we're right back where we started.
Back to square one. Yeah. There's a lot of analysts out there suggesting that is the pitfall here where they go back at digital currencies. Who's holding it? Who's auditing it? We get into the same problems as ever before. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here on this show. We didn't get through all of the topic lists here. And Jim, yes, you're really right here about this Khazarian war here, the last holdouts, the bio labs, the trafficking, how Russia ties into all of this and the BRICS. We'll get back into that here at part 2 with Kerry and Jim. We'll try to put this back on the board. Of course, we're going to talk about Project Bluebeam in the next part of the show as well, and see how that all ties into the white hats and some of the subversions that is being perpetuated against humanity from both sides. That is a very important conversation that I wanted to have with Jim and Kerry, and we'll have that in part 2. Jim, before we go today, how can we support you here at golden-jackass.com?
Sign up for the newsletter. It's the yellow rectangle in the middle. I also do consult very nicely. I've received a few sponsor button donations, and those are large amounts. But the easiest way, the best way for me is to sign up for the newsletter. What I've noticed in the last 2 months is I've had maybe a dozen people sign up for a consult call and a subscription, which is really nice. It's a lump of money. It helps me out quite a bit. I just, in April, I completed my 19-year anniversary, which is really quite amazing. It's the longest job I've ever had. I was employed at Digital Equipment Corp for 12 plus years. So that was the mark that I had to beat. Okay, this is now transformed, Jean-Claude. This is not a labor of love anymore. I do enjoy formulating arguments and explaining them and writing about them and outlining them. I do enjoy that, but it has become now a labor of love, a labor of war. Mm-hmm. I'm now considering myself to be a soldier, not just an analyst. I've been wounded. I've been wounded badly. I'm continuing because I want to save lives. That's not a motive that I had 5 years ago. Back then it was preserve life savings. Now it's that and save lives. I've had a number of compliments from people who say, Jim, you don't know how many lives you saved. I say, well, I have an idea, but I think it's a lot bigger than what I think, and I'd rather not explore that. I'm going to continue. I don't want to get a big head. I want to remain modest as a soldier, but I'm no longer an analyst. I'm a war correspondent. I am an analyst who's writing newsreels that people are watching instead of movies. Yeah. And that's how Walt Disney got his start. Mm-hmm. He hired Langley to do war newsreels to put into the movies. It's far more complicated than that. And I don't want to get into Disney World, one of the most disgusting places on the history of the planet. Okay, it's golden-jackass.com, 19 full years. I'm not alone. I've got 2 colleague groups. In addition to 2 colleague groups, which are the conventional finance and monetary policy, dollar and currencies and gold, I've got another group, and they're the digital group, the digital guys. And there are a couple women in there. And they're a smart bunch. They're 15 smart people. And they keep me on my toes. They help me with various things, understanding. I'm not alone. And on top of that, I got 30 to 50 different clients who send me things. I don't want to say every day, but 30 to 50 clients who send me more than one thing every week. Mm-hmm. So I've got a lot of boots on the ground, and the consult calls, I've done now 540 of them. They, in a sense, in a weird way, they're boots on the ground.
Also, yeah.
Like that 2 women who banded together in Southern Illinois to do a consult call to explain to me how they're managing their farms in Southern Illinois, growing corn and occasionally doing futures contracts to get seed capital. They sell their August crop with an August futures contract for corn, and they use the money to plant. And they use let's just say a central Midwest group to buy silver bars. So I'm learning how farmers are buying silver. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
in addition to the old guy a year ago, not older guy, but the older consult call I had today, someone said, Jim, you got it right. Bank of America is right in the middle of bankruptcy. Here's a document. Take a look. I got to take a look at it, but it's 70 pages. I'm overwhelmed. I am an office of one. I do the marketing, I do the accounting, I do the promoting, and I do the writing. But I got a lot of colleagues, and this is hard work. And I'm not being adequately rewarded in terms of a big savings for my nearly 20 years. I'm getting stripped from bizarre events, and I don't want to talk about it, but I am under nearly constant attack. And just one little tangible thing that people can relate to. I don't want to say that way. Let me just say there are over 300 hacking attempts per day.
Wow.
And it's causing, I'll just call it very minor inconveniences. They're not succeeding because the firewalls are powerful. The firewalls are much more powerful than they were 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But our Langley boys hate me.
Mm-hmm.
Wall Street boys hate me. Rockefeller boys hate me. Media moguls hate me. And I wear them as a badge of honor.
Rightly so. Guys, if you want to support Jim Willie, you can do so here at golden-jackass.com. And don't forget to go check out Kerry's work here also at projectcamelotportal.com. We will be back for a part 2 of this edition. Of course, give me a couple of days here and we'll try to put this back on the books for you guys so that we can finish the topic links for today. In the meantime, also please schedule your calendars for June 16, 1 p.m. Eastern for this special report with 107 on defense readiness, as well as continuity of government coming up. This was the War Correspondent Show special report here for June 2nd. I'm Jean-Claude Bion-Mystic. I love you guys. Have a great day. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you soon. Au revoir.
Can you